Happy Monday, everybody. Hope your week's starting out well. As always, this is an invitation to do a little self-work. Through the self-work that you do, you create a ripple effect. The more of us that do some self-work that creates many ripple effects leads to a greater social change. This is what we're going for with our Monday practice. We do it internally at our organization, and we're hoping you'll engage with us and be part of that movement. As a reminder, if you're interested in a little bit more of base information about the elements of the practice, check the description in the comments below. Like, subscribe, leave a comment if you're interested. Otherwise, let's jump right in. So the last couple weeks, we explored kind of the subtle movements behind visible body gestures or manifestations that we wanted to tune into. Last week, we explored healing and kind of the concept that someone is already whole, and by tuning in and listening to them or creating the space for them to grow into, they can come back to their holistic self of their own work, volition, and accord. This week, we're looking at archetype. And archetype is another foundational Meristem principle where the archetype is kind of a universal thing that might be in all elements of a given piece. So like an example of an archetype might be the crawling phase of early childhood. Everybody tends to go through that. There's some rare instances where a child doesn't, or it's a really short version of the phase. And there's definitely lots of instances where someone has a very different time frame for their crawling phase, but generally everybody goes through the crawling phase. So the crawling phase is kind of an archetypal movement pattern that shows up in development. That being said, the beauty about it is everyone is also free to find their own way into those archetypes. And so everyone has the freedom to flow in their own movement and manifest uniquely around some of these archetypes. And just like I was saying previously, what a crawling phase looks like for one child is very different for another child. And that's the beauty that we really try to capture at Meristem in terms of the way we look at the archetype. And rather than pinning somebody to an archetype, what we're doing is trying to see where we can find some of those archetypal movements within somebody, establish that as a starting point from which we can move for an educational or pedagogical progression moving forward. And as always, each person has their own freedom and their own creativity in creating themselves uniquely around some of these archetypal things. But the archetype does allow us to establish kind of a starting point of working collaboratively together. So our practice for this week is research. And so what we're doing with research is exploring these kind of underpinning archetypal movements that we might have. Can I notice what is showing up from a subtle movement standpoint that is archetypal? I'm a 37-year-old male adult, and there's certain things that I might be going through that might have an archetype for my age range or at some point in life that I could tune into. Whether it's, a midlife crisis, I don't know what to do with myself, or, coming into the confidence in the life experience that I've had, that I've lived enough that I can really start talking about it. Those are just a couple examples of things that I might want to research in and around myself. Really simply can be looking at, just the way that I go about doing my, eating food on a daily basis, or having a conversation with somebody, or, archetypal versions of the way I engage or inhabit my environment or myself. The value for this week is I communicate communication. And so along with the movement habits, we're looking at the archetypes. So let's say masculine, feminine, good, evil, mischievous, serious. These are, when taken in extremes, these are archetypes. Like in ancient Greece, there was an archetype of drama in theater, comedy versus tragedy. They're archetypes that live. And so what we're looking for this week in our communication is noticing the types of archetypes that are working through me, and then how I uniquely kind of inhabit that archetype. Am I the funny person? Do I try to constantly bring jokes and humor into a situation? And what's my means, my creative means by which I bring humor in a given way? Or am I the serious person? Do I always bring us back to the importance of the work that needs to get done, and so on, and really speak from an earnest, kind of heartfelt, striving perspective that, you know, is kind of getting everybody to take things seriously? So paying attention and tuning in, and then noticing how I'm communicating with others from that archetypal standpoint, just get to know, hey, where are the archetypes that I'm coming from that live within me, that I'm building myself around in unique, fun, creative ways. And so we're just noticing that in our communication, and then seeing if there's times where I could try on a different maybe color for that archetype, or a different way of approaching that archetype, or choosing to use a different archetype in a given situation to be more effective. And so just to recap, we're looking at the archetype, which is a universal pattern or a universal flow or a universal archetype, something that repeats itself over and over and over again and can be seen kind of in many different aspects of a thing, or many iterations of an element. We're looking at these patterns. An example is the crawling phase. Another example is the walking phase. Another example is verbalization. Those are all archetypes in development. And so we're looking then at ourself, other, and researching how these archetypes show up both in movement for ourselves and in our communication. Do I start with questions? Do I start with statements? Do I always get into the details? Do I always generalize? What are some of the archetypes that are regularly showing up as patterns in my communication? And by getting to know that about myself, or getting to know that about another, I can establish an inroad or a starting point to explore. So we had a little technical issue in our wrap up, so it's going to look a little bit different for the last 30 seconds, but here we go. So we were just finishing with communication and paying attention to the different archetypal patterns of our communication, whether we ask questions or statements, whether we get too deep into the details all the time, whether we overgeneralize on a regular basis. We're just looking at those patterns. And through finding those patterns and observing, we can establish a starting point by which to engage with another and then grow from there. And so this is our practice for the week. So as always, let's go forward and awaken the possible.